The mist hung low over London, a ghostly shroud that softened the edges of Buckingham Palace's grand facade. It was a chilly April morning in 2025, the kind that made breath visible and cheeks flush red. The forecourt, still damp from an overnight drizzle, glistened faintly under the pale dawn light. Though it was barely 7 o'clock, the first tourists had already begun to gather, their voices hushed as they snapped photos of the iconic gates and the motionless figures in scarlet tunics and towering bearskin hats. The air carried a weight of solemnity, a quiet reverence for the traditions that had stood as steadfast as the palace itself for centuries. This was Britain at its most timeless, a scene that could have been plucked from decades past, save for the smartphones glinting in the crowd's hands. Among the sentries stationed at their posts was Sergeant Rowan Hale, a guardsman of the Coldstream Guards. At 32, Rowan was a man forged by discipline and duty. His scarlet tunic was pristine, every button polished to a mirror sheen, his bearskin hat perched with mathematical precision. His face, weathered slightly from years in the field, was impassive, his gray eyes fixed on a point in the distance. To the untrained eye, he was a statue, another picturesque element of the palace's grandeur. But beneath the surface lay a story of grit and sacrifice. Rowan had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, where the chaos of war had tested his resolve. He had carried wounded comrades through dust-choked valleys, navigated the moral ambiguities of conflict, and returned home with a quiet pride in having served his country. Now, his battlefield was this graveled forecourt, his mission to embody the unyielding dignity of the crown. Standing guard was no mere ceremony for Rowan. It was a continuation of his oath, a silent vow to uphold the values that had guided him through fire and loss. In the growing crowd, a different figure stood out. Logan McRae, a 19-year-old from Manchester, had arrived in London with a backpack, a chip on his shoulder, and a burning desire to make his mark. With his tousled hair, ripped jeans, and a hoodie emblazoned with a garish logo, Logan was the antithesis of the palace's formality. He had grown up in a world of fleeting trends and instant gratification, where social media likes were currency and provocation was art. To him, the pomp and ceremony of Buckingham Palace were relics, ripe for mockery. His mates, a trio of lads, as restless as he was, flanked him with their phones already recording. They had spent the previous night in a hostel, plotting ways to go viral, and Logan had settled on the perfect target. The stone-faced guardsman who, according to legend, never reacted, no matter the taunt. To Logan, this was a game, a chance to cement his reputation as the fearless joker among his peers. The crowd was a mix of international tourists and a few locals, some clutching guidebooks, others sipping coffee from paper cups. A family from Japan posed for selfies, their laughter mingling with the chatter of a German tour group. A retired couple from Cornwall stood quietly, the husband pointing out the palace's architectural details to his wife. The atmosphere was one of anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for the moment when tradition would come alive in the form of the changing of the guard. But Logan had other plans. He nudged his mate, Kyle, a lanky lad with a vape pen dangling from his fingers. "Watch this," Logan muttered, his eyes glinting with mischief. He stepped forward, positioning himself just beyond the invisible line that separated the public from the guardsman's space. "Oi, mate," he called, his voice cutting through the morning quiet. "You ever get tired of standing there like a lemon?" A few tourists glanced over, amused. Logan's tone was playful, the kind of cheeky banter that might earn a chuckle in a pub. His mates sniggered, their phones trained on him. Rowan, of course, gave no response. His training was absolute. No reaction, no matter the provocation, unless protocol demanded otherwise. To move, to speak, was to break the sacred stillness that defined his role. Logan, undeterred, tried again. "What's with the hat?" Looks like you nicked it from a costume shop." This time, a couple of teenagers in the crowd laughed, and Logan's grin widened. He was feeding off the attention, his confidence swelling with every giggle. He took a step closer, his trainers crunching on the gravel. "Come on, soldier boy, give us a smile." Or are you scared you'll crack that pretty face? The mood in the crowd began to shift. The initial amusement gave way to unease as Logan's taunts grew sharper. A woman in a red coat whispered to her husband, "He's pushing it too far." A father pulled his young daughter closer, sensing the tension. Logan, however, was oblivious. He was in his element, the center of attention. His mates egging him on with hushed encouragements. "Go on, Logan, make him flinch," Kyle hissed, his phone wobbling as he tried to keep the shot steady. Logan's next move was bolder. He began mimicking Rowan's posture, standing ramrod straight and puffing out his chest in an exaggerated parody. He marched in place, swinging his arms with mock precision, his voice rising to a sing-song chant. Left, right, look at me. I'm a proper soldier. The crowd's laughter was sparse now, replaced by awkward silence. Even Logan's mates seemed less certain, their grins faltering. Rowan remained a monument of restraint. His breathing was steady, his grip on his rifle unwavering. But inside, he was acutely aware of every detail. The boys' reckless energy, the crowd's shifting mood, the faint hum of traffic beyond the palace gates. He had faced worse insurgents in Helmand, roadside bombs, the weight of command under fire. This was a different kind of test, one that required not action but endurance. To react prematurely would be to dishonor the uniform, to give the boy the victory he craved. So, Rowan waited, his silence a shield. Logan, sensing no resistance, grew bolder still. He stepped closer, far too close, his face inches from Rowan's. The crowd gasped softly, a collective intake of breath. Logan's bravado was now tinged with something darker disrespect, not just for Rowan, but for the institution he represented. "This is all a joke, isn't it?" he sneered, his voice loud enough to carry across the forecourt. "You lot prancing about in fancy dress, pretending you're important. Bet that gun's not even loaded." He reached out, his fingers brushing the brim of Rowan's bearskin hat. The crowd was silent now, the air thick with anticipation. A few tourists lowered their phones, as if ashamed to record what was unfolding. Logan's mates exchanged nervous glances, but Logan was too far gone to notice. He leaned in, his breath visible in the cold air, and whispered, "You're nothing but a tourist trap." For the first time, Rowan's voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. "One more step, and there will be consequences." The words were not a threat, but a statement of fact, delivered with the calm authority of a man who had seen the cost of recklessness. The crowd froze, the weight of the warning settling over them like the mist itself. Logan's smirk faltered, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He had an audience, a reputation to uphold. With a defiant chuckle, he took another step forward, his chest almost touching Rowan's. And then, in a moment of breathtaking audacity, he reached out and grazed the barrel of Rowan's rifle with his fingertips. The world seemed to pause. And then Rowan moved. His hand shot out, seizing Logan's wrist with the precision of a trained soldier. In one fluid motion, he twisted Logan's arm behind his back, pinning him without causing harm. The movement was so swift, so controlled, that it seemed almost choreographed. Logan gasped, his bravado collapsing into shock. His knees buckled slightly, but Rowan held him upright, his grip firm but not cruel. "This is what happens when respect is lost," Rowan said, his voice steady, each word a quiet rebuke. The crowd stood transfixed, some with hands over their mouths, others nodding in silent approval. The mist swirled around them, framing the scene like a tableau of justice. Logan's mates lowered their phones, their faces pale. The tourists who had been filming stopped, as if the gravity of the moment demanded reverence. A few began to clap, a slow, subdued applause that grew into a ripple of approval. It wasn't glee. They weren't cheering Logan's downfall. They were honoring Rowan, a man who had upheld his duty with dignity. In the face of provocation, the sound was muted by the mist, but it carried a weight that Logan couldn't ignore. His face flushed crimson, a mix of embarrassment and defiance. But he said nothing. He couldn't. The reality of his actions was sinking in, and it was heavier than he'd expected. Security arrived within moments. Two officers in high-visibility vests cutting through the crowd with practiced efficiency. They took Logan by the arms, their expressions stern but professional. "Let's go, lad," one of them said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Logan stumbled slightly as they led him away, his head bowed, his earlier swagger replaced by a sullen silence. The crowd parted to let them pass, their eyes following Logan until he disappeared around the corner of the palace. A few tourists resumed filming, but most simply stood, processing what they had witnessed. Rowan, meanwhile, had already resumed his post. His posture was unchanged, his gaze fixed once more on the horizon. To the crowd, he was the same impassive figure they had seen minutes before. But something had shifted. They saw him now, not just as a symbol, but as a man who had faced disrespect with composure, who had acted not out of anger, but out of duty. The applause had faded, but the respect lingered, palpable in the glances exchanged among the tourists, in the way they spoke of him in hushed tones as they drifted away. By midday, the incident was everywhere. Clips of the confrontation, captured from a dozen angles, flooded social media. On X, the videos racked up millions of views, accompanied by a storm of commentary. "Absolute legend," one user wrote, attaching a photo of Rowan standing tall. "This is why we respect our guards." Others were less kind to Logan. "Entitled Prat got what he deserved." Read one post, liked thousands of times, but the conversation wasn't one-sided. Some questioned the rigidity of the guards' protocol, arguing that Logan's antics, while rude, didn't warrant such a response. "It's 2025. One commenter wrote, "Do we really need soldiers playing dress-up to prove a point?" The debate raged on, splitting opinions, but uniting in one undeniable truth. Rowan Hale had become a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not. In the days that followed, the story grew legs. Newspapers picked it up, with headlines ranging from the tabloids' tourist tweet tamed by Hero Guard, to the broadsheets more measured, a lesson in respect at Buckingham Palace. Pundits weighed in, some praising Rowan's restraint, others using the incident to spark broader discussions about civility. In an age of performative outrage, a few even tracked down Logan, who had gone silent on his social media accounts. A blurry photo surfaced of him at a train station, head down, boarding a service back to Manchester. Rumors swirled that he'd been banned from the palace grounds, though no official statement confirmed it. His mates, too, had gone quiet, their accounts locked or deleted as the backlash grew. For Rowan, life continued, as it always had. He returned to his duties the next day, standing guard in the same spot, under the same grey sky. The crowds were larger now, many coming specifically to see the hero guard they'd read about. Some left flowers at the palace gates, a gesture that embarrassed Rowan when he heard of it. He wasn't a hero, he told himself. He had simply done his job. But late at night, in the quiet of his barracks, he allowed himself to reflect. He thought of his father, a former soldier who had instilled in him the value of discipline. He thought of his comrades in Afghanistan, some of whom hadn't made it home. And he thought of Logan, a boy who, for all his bluster, was still young, still learning. Rowan didn't hate him. If anything, he hoped the lad would take something from this a lesson, however painful. In the cost of disrespect, the incident faded from the headlines eventually, as all stories do, but its echo lingered. Tourists at Buckingham Palace were a little more cautious now, their banter tempered by the memory of what had happened. The guardsmen, too, carried themselves with a renewed sense of purpose, aware that their silent vigil was watched by a world quick to judge. And in the pubs and cafes of London, the story of Rowan Hale and Logan McRae became a kind of modern parable, told and retold with varying degrees of embellishment. It was a story of a nation's pride, of a young man's folly, and of a soldier who, without raising his voice, had reminded the world what it meant to stand for something greater than oneself. In the end, it wasn't about Logan's humiliation or Rowan's triumph. It was about respect, not the kind demanded by force, but the kind earned through quiet strength. It was about a misty morning when a boy pushed too far, and a man, rooted in duty, showed him the line. And it was about Britain, a nation that, for all its changes, still held fast to the values that had shaped it. Sergeant Rowan Hale, with his steady gaze and unyielding resolve, was more than a guardsman that day. He was a mirror, reflecting the best of what it meant to be British.